Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Last week, I took my daughter to the Freud Museum to see a screening of a film. It was called V13, In Forgetting There Lurks a Remembering, and it had Alan Cumming in as Freud. It's the first time it's been shown in the UK. There I was at a film premiere, and after the film there was a Q&A with the film director Richard Leeds and a psychotherapist. Now, there was a lot there that could make a fabulous podcast episode, but that's not for today. I asked a question about Alan Cumming and what drew him to the role of Freud, and we had a really good chat about this, and the general consensus was that Alan Cumming is fab. And this reminded me of something that happened a few years ago related to Alan Cumming. People who've known me only for the last few years won't know that I actually used to have problems with my eyes. I mean, my vision is terrible these days, but I did have a much more significant problem with my eyes. So initially, the diagnosis was a lazy right eye, and I was always told that this could never be fixed as I'd have double vision. Now, I learned how to deal with this. I'd often hold my head at certain angles so that it was less pronounced. And when my daughter was a toddler, she was referred to an eye specialist and then an optometrist. And anyone who I took my daughter to see initially assumed that I was the patient. And then when they realised that I wasn't the patient, they were clearly itching to get their hands on my eye. It was clearly something that was obvious that needed treatment. Long story short, my daughter's optometrist sat me down one day and said that things had moved on in optometry in 30 years. They could test for the double vision potential, and it was at least worth getting it looked at. I know the NHS isn't perfect, but once I got into the system, it was absolutely incredible. I had the pretest for double vision with Botox, and I didn't get the double vision. The consultants were reassuring. I'd been thinking about it, and I was like, is this a vanity procedure, really? But they were amazed that I hadn't had it done years before. And it turns out that actually both my eyes had an issue. Once they were happy that the double vision wasn't going to occur, I got put on the list for surgery, and a few months later, there I am arriving at the day unit. Before you start thinking, hang on, I thought she said that this was to do with Alan Cumming, and here she is rattling on about her eyes. This is where Alan Cumming comes into the story. The day surgery unit at the hospital in Bromley, I live in Bromley, is called the Alan Cumming Day Unit. And each time we'd gone past there, and believe me, with children who break bones as often as mine do, we'd gone past there more times than I care to think about. I'd often wonder, what does, or what has, star of stage and screen Alan Cumming, what did he do to get a day surgery unit named after him? Did the hospital perhaps save a beloved family member and he gave a substantial donation to say thank you? Did he have an incident on stage and get raced to the hospital where they performed life-saving surgery and he's now become a patron? So as we arrive at the day unit, when I'm due to have my surgery, I am looking around for any sign of an answer to my question. Will there be a framed picture of Alan on the wall shaking hands with the chief executive? I sit down in the waiting area and the nurse arrives to do the pre-op chat. And this also includes the consultant drawing a big red cross over the top of the eye that he's going to operate on. At this point, I am not sure whether to panic or be reassured. Anyway, understandably, I am more than a bit nervous. It was quite a substantial procedure that I was having done. There was going to be quite a lot of anaesthetic involved. And when I get nervous, I can babble. There was some denial going on here. I really did not want to think about what was going to happen, even though I'm surrounded by medical equipment and people in gowns. To make light conversation with the nurse who's with me at this point, I say to her, so I've always been intrigued. What did star of stage and screen Alan Cumming do to get the day unit named after him? She looked at me strangely and said, no, you've got it all wrong. Not that Alan Cumming. The unit is named after a previous mayor of Bromley. To say I was disappointed was an understatement. From glamour to local government in less than 10 seconds. However, that did give me something to focus on before it's my turn to go under the knife. Very successfully, I might add. I am so glad I opted to have it done. And now I have much more of an appreciation of people who choose to have plastic surgery for their confidence, because it absolutely changed my life. It sounds a bit melodramatic almost to say that, but it's true. It really did change my life and how I felt about myself. So let's have a think about the psychodynamic elements here. I really wanted it to be the Alan Cumming of stage and screen. I'd built up some wonderful ideas in my head of how this came to be. I was almost hoping for a little bit of theatre, and not just the operating kind. What I actually got was a smell of disinfectant and municipal beige. I didn't even get a bourbon biscuit once I'd come round from the anaesthetic, just a rich tea. And seriously, they are not exciting at all. I'd given a meaning to this place, which I had seen frequently, and it had lived in my mind with a certain element of glamour in my, and when I say my mind, I mean my unconscious mind. I'd given it symbolism. And then, when the reality met fantasy, it all came crashing down. At a time when it could have been really helpful for it to have been that Alan Cumming. We know hospitals are stressful places. I've had both my children at that hospital, so it had some good memories, but also some very difficult ones for me too. So in some ways, I needed to make this place feel a bit safer, and in that moment it was taken away from me. I mean, let's cut to the chase. I was anxious, big time, and I really needed something to displace my anxiety onto. By expecting it to be star Alan, I was giving myself a comedic shield. Now, interestingly, once I'd got over this hurdle and I was in the ward waiting to go down to the operating theatre, I was turning the scenes in front of me into some kind of Victoria Wood-style sketch that I could regale friends and family with later. I was distracting myself from all the difficult thoughts by latching onto a fantasy ideal in my mind because I wanted to protect myself from the emotional reality. The reality was that I was going to have relatively lengthy surgery, and actually it turned out to be nearly 2 hours on one of my eyes, and there were risks involved. I had 2 small children at that time. The other thing is, once you're over 40, the pre-op checks involve all kinds of cardiac checks too, right next to the morgue, which did not help one bit. My invitation to you this week is for you to consider where in your life you've been protecting yourself from anxiety with comedy. Hands up, this is one of my go-to defence mechanisms. If I'm anxious, I turn into a budget Victoria Wood. And whilst I'm making other people feel better by lightening the moment, I'm also keeping myself away from what is truly important. This isn't all the time that I'm funny. I like to think that I can be witty with the best of them, given a fair wind and the right tide. But when it becomes a little bit overinvested, that's when I know that there's something else going on that perhaps I don't really want to look at. And this is unconscious. I'm not desperately trying to be funny. It can feel like I go on autopilot a bit. So there's a good chance that it's my defence mechanisms ramping up to protect me. And, as always, give yourself some grace with this. It's not easy when you realise that you've been using something to protect yourself so that you don't feel anxious. We can feel a bit of guilt, as if we've been doing something wrong. Rest assured, this is an extremely common way of protecting ourselves. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet, and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics, or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor, mentor or trainer for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As well as producing this podcast, The Dynamics of Everyday Life has lots more psychodynamic fun going on, and you can find out more at dynamicsofeveryday.life.